gonna go ahead and get us started, and yeah, this is gonna be recorded so we can ultimately share it with the masses even more. First off, I want to welcome you all here. We have a panel today with the San Francisco Mime Troupe and our fantastic guests. The Mime Troupe, we're a Tony Award-winning theater group that produces activist work for free in public parks around San Francisco. We've been doing it for 61 years. And this year, of course, we are finding that we're doing it in a modified format, going and taking to the world of the interwebs. We have a 9-part series that's called Tales of the Resistance, in which we're releasing episodes as podcasts throughout the summer. And we are fortunate enough to have the opportunity to re-release our 2015 show, a video of it, Freedomland, for the public. And it is online. It's been online for the past week, and you have one more week until July 19th to catch the show. You can find out all sorts of info about that on the San Francisco Mime Troupe website. So make sure to check that out. Before we begin, I want to give a huge thank you to first off our guests who you'll get to meet, and as well acknowledge that we're all broadcasting from different places, but I'm broadcasting specifically from indigenous land, and I think and all of us are coming from a place that's we're coming from a legacy of colonization. So I want to acknowledge that I'm broadcasting from Ramhash Ohlone land. And if any of you want to place in the chat the specific territory that you're on in terms of native lands, please feel free to go ahead, and that can give us a sense of kind of where we're all coming from. So yeah, first off, I'll go ahead and introduce the folks that we have with us today. And then I'll give you all a chance to introduce yourselves. First off, we have Michael Gene Sullivan, a writer, performer, and sometimes director with the San Francisco Mime Troupe. We have Lisa Hori-Garcia, a performer with the Mime Troupe, who's been with us in productions. Hugo Carbajal, who's another mime trooper who's was one of the performers from Freedomland. Welcome, welcome. And as well, Karim, who's coming from the Defund SFPD Now campaign and from the DSA San Francisco's Afro-Socialist committee. So we're very excited to have them. I think one of our panelists might be running late or having some Zoom troubles, but I'll be keeping in touch with her. She's Rupa Maria, coming from the Do No Harm Coalition, which is a radical group of doctors and folks working in the medical field. So we should have a great talk today. First off, how about you go ahead and each of us can introduce ourselves. I'm Kari. I use he, him, or they, them pronouns. I'm the community engagement coordinator with the Mime Troupe. And and then Ira just
hey,
and joined us. Hi
hey,
there.
Ira. How you doing?
Ira is a composer for the Mime Troupe, and so we're very glad for him to be joining us.
And lyricist.
And what?
And lyricist.
Lyricist, and fabulous. So we're very glad to have Ira here as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, folks can go ahead and introduce themselves and tell us, for Alex, you can tell us sort of more about your organizations, and then folks from the Mime Troupe, tell us what you were doing on Freedomland in 2015. Let's start with Michael.
Hi. So I'm Michael Gene Sullivan. I've been with the San Francisco Mime Troupe now 32 years. I'm an actor. Yeah, I know. Came in as an actor, started writing, started directing, and now I've been resident playwright for the last 20 years. And so I wrote, and I'm in Freedomland, and I'm also in the process of writing the Tales of the Resistance this year.
Thank you very much. How about Lisa?
I am Lisa Hori-Garcia. I've been with the Mime Troupe since 2004, and I regularly perform in the parks in the summers with the troupe. I also help with the Youth Theater Project, which will be in its 25th year. We bring in high school age students from all over San Francisco, different parts of the Bay, and they meet regularly for 8 weeks, and we teach them the Mime Troupe style of writing, of performing, and they write their own, collaboratively, their own political piece that then they perform to their peers and to whatever audience. And we, what else? Yeah, and I'm just really excited to be here to get to reflect on this show. I can't believe it's been 5 years, but yes.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you very
Karim.
much, Lisa. How about Hugo?
Hey everyone, my name is Hugo Carbajal. Thank you very much. And I am now in Los Angeles, but I was a trooper, a collective member for quite a few years. But I'm very happy that I did Freedomland. It was the last play that I did before I moved to LA in the Bay Area. And it was also where I got my equity card. Hey. But it was definitely quite an experience to be a part of the show and to create the show from scratch with Michael and the rest of the cast, you know what I mean? So yeah, I'm very happy that this is a part of my history.
Thank you. Ira?
I had the pleasure of working on 4 Mime Troupe shows between 2014 and 2019. This, I believe, was the second. I was and am good friends with Amos Glick, who was in the troupe for a long time and was famous for playing George W. Bush. And it was partly through that connection that I, became a member, and I just have always been delighted to have been a part of it.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Alex?
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Alex. I use she, her pronouns. As Kari said, I am a part of the Defund SFPD Now campaign, which is led by the Afro-Socialists and Socialists of Color Caucus. And that is both a part of and separate from the SFDSA chapter. So yeah, that's like quite a few things happening there. So the goal of the Defund SFPD Now campaign is pretty simple. We're trying to defund the SFPD as quickly as possible. And we're asking to have like 100% defunding as quickly as possible. And we want to, reimagine what can like public safety look like in a world that doesn't have police in it anymore. So yeah, DSA is, I think people are mostly familiar with DSA. It's just the Democratic Socialists of America. And we have a SF specific chapter that works on lots of different things. The Afro-Socialists and Socialists of Color Caucus is more recent, whereas the SF-DSA chapter, I think, was founded in maybe like 2016, but don't quote me on that one. The Afro-Socialists and Socialists of Color Caucus is a lot newer and was founded at the beginning of this year to create a specific space for POC, and especially for Black people who are socialists and want to do work around socialist principles. So yeah, happy to be here.
So much. Great. As I hope you can tell, we have it's going to be an exciting conversation. We have a great group. First off, I'd like to start off with for each of you, I guess starting with Alex, how did you get involved in organizing around policing and racial justice in San Francisco? And for the troopers, how did the troupe land on the theme for Freedomland and its 2015 production? So let's go ahead and start with Alex and then troopers.
Yeah, so let's see. So I've lived in San Francisco for about 3 years. And so I think these are issues that have been very important to me for quite some time, but I didn't initially necessarily know how I wanted to go about actually doing work around them. So I think around February, pre-quarantine, I was working to do canvassing and stuff during Bernie Sanders' campaign. And during that time, I met a lot of folks in DSA, as well as some people that I was already friends with who I didn't know were in DSA. And so I think after everything that happened at the beginning of June, and I'm sure we'll kind of start to get more into that later and how that parallels with things that also happened in 2014, 2015. I was like, okay, I can't, I feel like I can't not do anything anymore. Like I need to just try something. And if it doesn't work, I'll try something else. But I don't want to hold myself back from like trying to be involved. So yeah, basically those friends that I have, those people that I met encouraged me to get involved. And that's how I joined the campaign. And here I am now talking to all of you.
Thank you.
I'm going to start because I feel like jumping in. It takes us a year plus to write a show. So in 2014, we're gathered and just basically like around the table, what are people feeling? What's the climate like? What's itching at us? What is it that we want to talk about that we feel like is topical and that will still be topical and relevant by the time the summer hits? And for me personally, the 2014 was a big year where Alex Nieto, who was San Franciscan, he's 28-year-old man, security guard, who was having dinner up in Bernal Hill, was shot by 4 SF police officers. And that in conjunction with, that was the same year that we lost Tamir Rice, we lost Eric Gardner, we lost so many people. It just felt like something, this wasn't a new thing. Technology was helping us capture footage, now document things that we had heard were going on, that were happening around us. But all of a sudden, we now had the ability to see it with our own eyes. And you couldn't refute it. Like, that happened. We just witnessed that together collectively. And I felt like a lot of people around the table were like, what do we have to do something. We have to say something about this. There's something. And honestly, as someone who lived in San Francisco for such a long time, to have it happen literally Bernal Hill was right next to where I lived. I also felt like, what is going on here in the Bay, in San Francisco? The police are gunning people. So that's, for me, I think, trying to recall back 6 years ago, that felt like some of the things that we were starting to like pull into the room and just starting to talk about, like, how do we address this, the heaviness, the weight of this. So I don't know, others that were in that room, like passing the baton, anyone?
Well, having grown up in San Francisco and having been stopped by the cops a bunch of times, having cops threaten to shoot me for sitting in my own car in the wrong neighborhood, being arrested and searched for nothing. So for me, this was always a thing. And each year with Mime Troupe shows and the shows that I've written, dealing with different issues, finding, like Lisa was saying, to try to find the burning issue of the year. And this issue has kind of always been on my mind, but trying to find a way to tell this particular story and making it, sometimes when you're trying to do political theater, you can get too far ahead in a way where people just dispute what you said, even though you've done the research and everything. They can be like, oh, well, that's not true. And then a year later, they're like, oh my God, that was true. And so it wasn't until we'd done shows about race and police brutality before, but they'd been aspects of the show, and the show was really about something else. And to try to show that everyday terrorism that Black Americans feel, I wrote a piece I was a blogger for Huffington Post for years. And I wrote a piece that was just documenting every time I'd been stopped by the cops. I didn't even put them all in San Francisco. And that was a big point, was that in the liberal capital of the left coast, that in San Francisco, the police are the same as they are in Tulsa, and they're the same as they are in Raleigh, North Carolina, the same as they are in New York. They have that particular military, we are occupying a community, and that community is always a danger to us, so anything we do is self-defense attitude. and how they take more and more of the budget of a town, and how they've continued to militarize both mentally and with their equipment. So this was something that I was kind of dealing with all the time, having that I know, and I've written a lot of other stuff where it's like, I know that when a police car comes down the street, I'm statistically more in danger. It wasn't they just weren't there. If I was just surrounded by criminals, it's how much it has been embedded in what we've accepted in the United States. And so I think, as Lisa was saying, in 2014, and before that, as videos started to show up that validated for all those people who just didn't believe us. You know, you could be black and stand up all day and say, you know, the cops are on my ass all the time. But people are going to go, yeah, you must have done something. So actually, we shouldn't need that validation. But unfortunately, having the video validation of someone's running away from the cop and they hadn't committed a violent crime, they get shot in the back, all of these kinds of things. So it felt like this was a time where we could deal with this issue kind of head on and in a complete show. And also for myself, having my son who's up there in a loft, having a son growing up in this particular society and going, this is something we've got to deal with. You know, we always have to deal with it. When you have the talk to your kid, you know, as a black parent, when you have that talk and say, this is the way it is. And you want them to be able to be kids, have fun, run and play. But at some point you have to say, you have to kind of step in and go, that is absolutely your right. You just have to have this extra bit of care. And as you get older, that care has to get greater and greater. So I wanted to write Freedomland in part to kind of, as with every Mime Troupe show, the goal of every show is to change the entire world. If everybody sees it and everybody gets it, everything changes and we're done. We can disband the company. And so wanting to have something hard hitting enough and to tell a story that's political in terms of, you know, economic politics, and in terms of immigrants' rights, and in terms of federal funding, but also a very particular and small story about this grandfather trying to save the life of his grandson in a society that would kind of prefer it if he were just still a slave. You know, being in a society that treats us all as blacks as kind of runaway, dangerous slaves. That's how they see us. And so, at coming to as we were talking about all this stuff, and I was like, I got this idea, and as I started molding it and changing it and making it the things that I knew that I wanted in the story, and then all of the other stuff that came up, like the ending and the love to show two black men related who have a relationship, you know, and neither of them are gangsters, and neither of them are hoods, and neither of them are cops. They don't carry guns, which is something we don't see very often. So trying to do the show and then wanting, I remember when we opened, you guys, Lisa and Hugo, you might, I don't know if you remember this because I was listening for it. When we opened, and the moment, and I don't want to give away too much for people who haven't seen the show, but at the moment at the end, where an audience member, the audience went absolutely silent. And one person in the audience went, no! And I was like, yes. You know, this should hurt you because as a society, people are tacitly giving approval to this violence in our police, from our police. And so I wanted to make sure that the audience knew that there is no easy way out. There is no fine and dandy happy ending. You know, it is relentless terrorism. And that we have to be not just vigilant, but we have to actually be active to change things. And the demand of the song at the end, beautiful song that Ira wrote of, how can you live in a world like this? That's the question. You, as the audience, know these things are happening. How do you live with yourselves? How do you not take active, do something. Oh God. Anyway, musical comedy. So it was it was, and then when the show ran and it did well, and we took it around Northern California because, as Kari was saying, we play in parks in San Francisco, but we also play throughout California. Sometimes we take shows around the country, and we've gone overseas. It really depends on where the funding is, since we don't take corporate dough. But since then, I've been working for the last 5 years to try to find a way to get this show online. And getting Actors Equity to agree to let us do it, and then raising the money and everything. So I'm so glad that it worked out, especially at this particular time, to show kind of an activist artist reaction and movement, and not just to be poor us, or to say we've got to kind of cover these things up. And that's a big challenge for theater now. And it has always been the challenge of reacting in the moment, to say this is an activist moment. We've got to change things. We've got to inform our audience. We've got to challenge the powers that be. We've got to discomfort the comfortable and comfort the uncomfortable. You know, we've got to do all of these things now. And the Mime Troupe is particularly well positioned to always react immediately to the needs of the revolution.
Fantastic. Yeah. And we're so lucky to be able to have that agreement with Equity, and for us to be able to see it for the next week. And something that's I like is when you do work that's really in the present, that's in the now, and it's specific, it speaks to other eras. It's like the more specific you are, the more it can become universal in a weird way. So there's the fact that this show is coming from 2015, but speaks to this moment in particular ways.
Unfortunately.
I'm sorry?
I said unfortunately.
Yeah, because this show could be from the 80s
absolutely.
or the 70s or the 40s or 100 years ago.
Exactly.
And I mean, and the show itself had references to the Panthers, who were themselves policing the police and having all of these conversations that we're having today. So it's, I mean, history, people like to think about progress, and we're a progressive city, but like history isn't full of progress. It's cycles, it's repetitions, and it steps backwards at times. So absolutely.
Yeah, I think, was it Karl Marx said, history does not repeat, but it echoes.
Huh, I like that. So on the note of those echoes, I'm curious, what has it been like to think about the show in the current moment? And in the case of Alex, to be thinking about sort of the Black Lives Matter movement from the start of the hashtag until today, like, how do you see those echoes of history? And for troopers, how do you see the echoes of Freedomland?
Yeah, so I mean, I think for me, in some ways, it is, very traumatizing to, I look back to like, okay, when I was in 2014, I was in college, and like, we hear about this like horrible thing that's happened, and like that sparked up quite a bit of debate on our campus, and like, just being, forced to like, just feel like you're justified, like having to justify your existence to people and debate your existence with people, obviously is, very, very difficult to have to feel like you have to do. And it's weird now, I think, because I think when news like broke out about, George Floyd and everything, like it, like I think we talked about it a little bit before the panel started, like this feeling of like deja vu, and like, it's very weird to like see it happening again, but to see that the reaction is so different now. And like, I'm a very big proponent of, being like critical of like technology and stuff, like in a lot of ways, like technology is like very neutral, right? And it depends a lot, like who is the one who is utilizing it and for what, and how it is like going to operate. So like, in some ways it's good that like we have, like cameras and stuff now, because people can like very clearly see what is going on. But at the same time, we see that like, somehow people are still able to, make excuses like, oh, like he did this, she shouldn't have done that. Like if you had like behaved in a different way, then like this wouldn't have happened to that person would not have died. When like, we know that like all of the, like, we know that like all of that's like bullshit, right? But like, it doesn't really like it in some ways it is like very like disheartening that like that's not enough for people, and it like has helped me to realize that like, I think what it will take, like what it makes me question, like what will it take for some people to understand, like why did it take so long for so many people to Like why, like people who, you know, were not children in 2014, who were like full grown adults, to then it took like all of that time to now to be able to say, okay, yeah, there is a problem with the police. And I think like we're in a very important political moment right now, right? Where like we have a lot of people who are understanding that, a lot of people who are understanding like, hey, we need to change things. And it's important that we like seize that moment. But I do want to kind of think about like, how do we talk about these issues and talk about these problems without starting to get into like debates about like who is and who is not a person, and like who deserves like certain types of rights and who doesn't deserve them.
Yeah, absolutely. Ira and Hugo, do you have any sort of reflections on sort of revisiting the Black Lives Matter movement or revisiting
I just
Freedomland?
think, the whole thing about technology and the fact that we can see this now, I mean, that dates back to Rodney King, when people clearly saw this videotape, and yet those guys were declared innocent. And it happens again and again and again. And I think the thing about the fact that these things are documented, where common sense says, okay, now things are going to change, and it hasn't, has totally fueled the outrage here. And I also think a lot of people, in 2014, dating back to 92 or whenever the Rodney King thing was, a lot of people are outraged. A lot of people still do basically nothing because they don't know what to do. And perhaps also there isn't sort of some cumulative critical mass of people around them where they feel empowered now to do something. And frankly, I think just the horror of the Trump administration is a huge part of this. I think people are, in general, white people, are so angry about what's going on. And just look at the insanity that when something like this happens, and the African-American community is ready to be up in arms, suddenly white people want to join them. Suddenly we go, okay, we get it. We get it. The world is insane. You're right. Whereas I think a lot of people were safely in their little bubble, and I don't, I think white liberals didn't say, oh, he deserved it, but I think they said sort of, sigh, something must be done, and then went back to doing nothing, and so I think we are at an important moment. I think it's great that the show is out now, and let's keep the pressure on.
Yeah, and one of the things that the show depicts is folks trying to change the system from within, and sort of the challenges of that. So Lisa, your character is sort of this cop who sort of believes that she's doing the right thing. It believes that like if you just stick to principles, it's going to work out. And the show, in a lot of ways, criticizes that more mentality. And I think a lot of people today are seeing that. Sort of attempts at reform are failing, and are thinking about how we can divert resources away, thinking about defunding. So I'm curious on that note, Alex, I'd love to hear about like how you see the work that the language of defund the police is doing versus reform the police. And then Lisa, maybe we can hear a little bit from you about what you learned from playing that character.
Oh, should I go first? Okay, sorry, that was unclear to me. Yeah, so I mean, I think that language is actually what like kind of flipped a switch for me of like, oh, like this is in some ways like this moment is different, because I think like in the past what we've seen, right, is that people are like, oh, a few bad apples, like we need to for there to be more regulations, we need body cams, we need all these different strategies so that we can make policing less harmful, and that doesn't really recognize that like policing the way that it's currently constructed in our society is inherently just state-sanctioned violence and social control, mostly over Black people, poor people, trans people, so many people. And like seeing people say like defund the police is like, oh, like, okay, we're recognizing now that like what we want isn't changing the police. What we want is something completely different. And we are willing to. And I think this is a conversation that we have a lot, is like, a lot of times you talk about police abolition or prison abolition and people will say like, oh, like what, but like, what do we do without that? Like what comes next? And like, I think saying defund SFPD, defund the police in general, is saying that like we are all willing to come together and commit to like figuring out how do we reimagine those things? How do we actually solve the problem that we want to solve, which is public safety, making people feel safe, making sure that people's basic needs are being met, rather than the problem that is currently solved, which is, you know, policing and controlling populations that are currently like very marginalized. So yeah, and I think that is like very, very important, like that wording and that phrasing.
Yeah, I think that in my mind, that's sort of what Freedomland was about, was like actually recognizing that policing is at the core of so much systemic racism, economic racism in our communities, tying both policing to economic policies and to city policies. Yeah. Lisa, go ahead. I'd love to hear again sort of your perspective on from playing this role.
Sure. You know, having the character who's young, naive, who really sees, who has this kind of vision of like really doing good and helping people. She had fought in Afghanistan. She was coming back and wanted to basically be, you know, a good citizen to and help the people around her. And we spent a lot of time talking about the trajectory of the character arc for Emily Militis, like where she starts out and where she ends up. And have that juxtaposition of the way that she views coming into the police academy and being a police officer. And then you see other people who also enter into the academy and sort of their mindset. I feel like we really wanted to show that there's a spectrum. It's not just everyone's coming with the same mindset, but that the corruption of it, when you go into the system, the structural inequality of it, it can corrode a person, or it taints the way that they view themselves, or that the role that they now have, and with that, the way that they behave or they wield that power. So that by the end, as much of a good do-gooder as Emily Militis wants to be or tries to be, you see that those shades of gray really start to come out, and she's at this place where she's really torn with what she feels her ideals are, and then what is being conditioned or socialized by the higher ups, the peer pressures, the way that you are when you're inside wearing that uniform, and the way that you relate to your brothers and sisters in blue. And I feel like it was important for us as a company to not just paint the police in like one shade. We really needed to see that there are these gradations. There are people on the inside who, you know, are trying their best to uphold and be and not be a bad apple, you know, but that they come into conflict, and that there is that conflict of what do I do, and I feel like we're seeing a lot more of that. There are a lot of police officers who are coming out like on their phones and filming themselves and posting it, and are talking about that struggle, that conflict that they have, and I feel like that's helping fuel this. We need to change this system. We need to eradicate, pull things out like weeds, like get rid of it. Defunding is a positive step in the right direction. We have to, the system, the way that it's been, and us trying to work within it hasn't worked. It hasn't worked for centuries. Like there's no way. So I feel like I don't know, that for me, watching Freedomland today and looking around at where we are in July of 2020, it was kind of a mind like, what is happening or what isn't happening? And I feel like being relevant in this way, topical in this way. I hope, like Michael said early on in his introduction, I hope we get to a point where the change happens and we don't have to keep creating these plays that are putting a mirror up to society and say, look at yourself, look what's going on. Anyway, I could.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Ooh.
Hugo, you haven't said anything.
Is that the job?
Oh,
Yeah,
all right.
please. I think my internet is jumping in and out. So go ahead, Hugo.
Uh-oh.
Are
you
you
muted?
You're muted.
What was your question, Michael?
There's.
I was just like, because we were all talking about what it was like, and you had to play some very particular characters, very different characters,
Yes.
both Luis and the
Sergeant.
the captain, the police captain, basically chasing yourself through the show.
Yeah.
And so, now it's some time away. I don't know if you've had a chance to go back and see the show. But yeah, what was it like? And you were in the collective. Oh, for those people who don't know, the San Francisco Mime Troupe, unlike most theater companies, does not have an artistic director. We have an artistic collective. That collective then delegates responsibility. So this person's writing, this person's directing, these are the actors, these are the designers. But the overall artistic and political movement of the company is done by the collective. And we three, me, Lisa, and Hugo, Hugo has left the collective, but we'll see how that works out for him. But anyway, yeah. So what was it like for you? Because this was, you'd been around for a little while, and doing a show that gave you such different characters. What was that like?
Well, even one character was two characters himself.
Right.
I think for me that this show really resonated because I got to tell a story that's not often told, is the story of the immigrant, and how what's the word, when you're inventive you have to be to survive and to make it through. And that's what I appreciated about Luis. He had to invent a whole other persona so that he could hide among us, right? Instead of just being himself, he had to be this crazy Jewish guy.
I remember in rehearsal when I said, can you do a New York Jewish accent? I'm thinking of this for the character, and you were like, maybe. Let me work on it.
Yeah, at first the idea of it was kind of far-fetched, but then I go, oh, no. He has to, this is reflecting on how inventive we have to be and how absurd it is that we have to be so inventive to survive. And so that's the story that really resonated for me, especially being an immigrant myself. And then for the chief, man, it was a challenge because he was just pure evil, pure greed, right? And so then how do I humanize him? How do I ground him a little bit? But at one point I said, why not? Let's really turn up the volume on the intensity of this guy. Why should I fight so hard to humanize him? And so I just, by that point, said, let's do this. Let's really focus on how bad the system is and who is benefiting from it.
With that intense cigar that you did, such physical in the face. So thank you. I'd like to jump into audience questions, and we had our first one coming in. I'd love to hear more from Alex about ways to get involved with Defund SFPD Now and what some upcoming actions are. The end of the play ends in how do we live in a world like this? And the answer is we take action.
We take action, and we try to take care of not just ourselves, but our communities. Because I think that's really important, right? Is to not just, stop at an individual level. How do I take care of me? But, how do I take care of everyone? But yeah, so in terms of getting involved with Defund SFPD Now, first I just want to, clarify, because I meant to do that at the beginning, but forgot to, that, Defund SFPD Now and DSA and AfroSoc were not the only groups that are organizing around this issue. And like we don't want to at all like give off that impression. There's a lot of people who are doing this work, and we're building on top of work that a lot of other people have already started. You know, we're kind of picking up from what a lot of other people have already worked on. In terms of getting involved with us specifically, if you go to our website, www.defundsfpdnow.com, we have a form on there. It should be, if you just scroll down like a little bit, there should be a form there where you can just give us like your name and email, and like what level of involvement you're interested in. So, you know, I understand that, like, you know, not everybody has time to be fully involved in like organizing this whole campaign. But if you're interested in, you know, taking part in our actions and like hearing about our actions when those are coming up, you can sign up to just do that. Or if you're interested in being involved in like a working group, you can also like specify that too. So I think that can be like a good way to, you know, just start to like dip your toes in, see how it feels. In terms of upcoming actions, so there's actually a meeting going on right now where they're discussing what are some of our upcoming actions going to be. I think our number one priority right now is, for anyone who's unfamiliar, part of the San Francisco City Charter says that we have to have a minimum of a little under 2,000 police officers as part of the SFPD at any given time. Like that's just like mandated. And so obviously that is quite a barrier to trying to completely defund the police. You can't really do that if we just have a mandatory minimum staffing requirement. So right now, and earlier today, actually, there was a meeting where Supervisor Yee put forth, he already put it forth last week, but basically they were continuing to talk about this amendment that he's proposing, which will hopefully get on the November ballot, and people can vote to say that they want to get rid of that requirement, and make that, and not, you know, have like that minimum, because I think a lot of people would disagree with that. Even if they're not against the police, I think a lot of people would just disagree with having such an arbitrary number. So I think that's going to be like a big priority for us, is making sure that gets on the ballot. And then once we know that that's going to be on the ballot, making sure that people are aware of that and are interested in actually like going out and voting. So yeah, that's at least some of our stuff that we have coming up.
And I know you did a call-in with the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. So
Yeah. So yeah, in the past week, we had, I think, like probably 3 or 4 different actions that we did. So we organized public comment for both the SFPD budget hearing as well as that Rules Committee meeting. So at the budget meeting, the messaging was more just, you know, general, like, we want to defund the police. We do not value, like, we don't see value in what the police currently function as. And we want to see that work being passed to different institutions. In addition, I can't be out here and not mention that currently SF spends like over $700 million on the San Francisco Police Department budget.
Christ.
And that's a hell of a lot of money. And, you know, I think that, like, given coronavirus, right, like a lot of government programs are facing cuts. And so how can we like go through that? But the San Francisco Police Department is asking for more money. Like, it's kind of ridiculous, right? So
yeah, I live in a suburb right near El Cerrito, over in East Bay, and our city government spends over 70% of its annual budget on policing, and we're trying to get like a compost program. And they're like, oh, we don't have the money for that. I'm like, you spend 70% of your budget on this. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Well, the fact that it's directly related to jobs. It's like, as the economy goes down, as people are making less, as people are more desperate, and more people are forced into homelessness, as more people feel like the despair that leaches through a society, and so people become addicted to drugs, they deal with all of these things, and instead of dealing with the foundational problems, which are jobs and security and healthcare, we deal with this police bandage. You know, that every community is like, well, the first thing we have to do is get security, and you will never get security. You will never be secure enough, and you'll just keep throwing money in that. And what we need to do is, every time a politician says, well, first we have to do security, we have to vote that sucker out. And we have to get somebody who understands that the fundamental problem is economic.
Absolutely.
And that if we can deal with the economics of the situation and give people security and give people reasonable and good education and have them feel safe in their community, in their society, and in their families, then the police can kind of, then defunding the police step by step by step, making sure that they're not dealing with people who are having a psychological break. They're not dealing with people who are just having an argument. They're not dealing with some kid who is just upset at his parents. They're not dealing with all of that. And we narrow down to what they're just supposed to deal with. And then we can get rid of that too.
You can definitely get rid of that too.
If we change, but we have to change the society fundamentally and to make sure that it serves the wealth serves the working class, and that the working class needs to feel secure, and that the working class needs to benefit from the wealth of the society and the wealth that they create in the society, instead of having the police are basically, in addition to, for Black people, them just being slave catchers, they're also the security guards of capitalism. They protect rich people and their property. It's like going into a giant mall and having that bastard who's just going to keep telling you to move along and ask you why you're here, and then throw you out or arrest you or brutalize you in some way. We are all in this giant mall of the United States, and we're just supposed to be customers spending money. And the police are there to make sure we don't break any rules and get kicked out if they ever feel, or any of the shopkeepers ever feel endangered. And we have to change that entire mentality fundamentally. It's our country. It is ours. We made it, the working class. And we need to make sure that all aspects of it function for us first.
Right? And there's nothing wrong with people taking care of each other and making sure that everyone has the basic rights, the basic necessities. And as those keep getting stripped away, as people continue to have high unemployment, and where are they going to get their groceries, where shelter over their heads, pay their rent for next month or this month, whatever that is, right? All of those things, all of those billions of dollars that are being put into these other directions, if we were able to harness them. And I know that people have, I'm sure nobody here, the people listening, but people, when they think of socialism or democratic social, they're like, oh, well, why are we going to give free handouts? No, that's not it at all. We are taking care of each other. We're making sure, just like Michael said, that we, the foundation of us is being taken care of, then we can do that narrowing down. Then the other stuff that's happening can be addressed in the way that it should be addressed. With these other things, whether it's social services or education, healthcare for everybody. It's just mind-boggling to me how.
Yes. Oh my God. I think a lot of the contradictions of capitalism are becoming more and more apparent to people. Yeah. And I think that is helping people to realize why such change is necessary. I
think Ira had to dash for time.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Yeah. And just to, I guess, quickly get to the second question that's on the Q&A, is there any progressive groups within the police officers union, or are they unilaterally opposed to change? So at the budget, at the SFPD budget hearing, the chief of police was there, and one thing that the supervisors kept saying, which, we're going to address that at some point, is that, oh, thank you so much, chief of police, for being here and for being so open to reform and being so open to change. And so I would imagine that this varies quite a bit from city to city. But I think what we have to keep in mind, right, is that reform is just a distraction. And I think back to 2014, 2015. And at that time, I was very committed to, how do I make my college better? How can I make my college more inclusive? And doing that work in some ways was important, but in a lot of ways was just a distraction from getting at a lot of these underlying issues that Michael very succinctly laid out. People right now, a lot of what we consider to be crimes, right, are things like stealing. Stealing is a crime because we prioritize property over people. And we live in a society that right now thinks it's worse to give away food for free and instead just chooses to burn it or destroy it in some other way because there was nobody to pay for it. And nobody can use resources unless it's been paid for by someone. And so I think that is important to keep in mind, is that, a lot of these institutions being the way they are, being so violent, is just baked into its DNA, and it's impossible for it to really be changed from within like that. And I still haven't watched the play, but I'm going to watch it right after this. And I think that, I imagine that a similar conclusion will be drawn there.
I jump on. I think that is very much in the play. And the other thing I want to build up off of what Lisa was saying about care, because I think, especially if you look at the work of the Do No Harm Coalition and Rupa, who I know could be here tonight, something that's interesting with them is that they're folks in the medical profession saying, how can you fund, like in some ways, how can we fund care for society? How can we fund the jobs programs that we need? How can we, I mean, their whole motto, the Do No Harm Coalition, how can we remove the harm of policing and redirect it to the healing that actually goes into poverty alleviation, that is able to address the reason that people steal is because they need money, frankly. And so just addressing the roots of these problems is so powerful, and it's amazing when you see the work of folks who are bringing together economic justice with the work to stop police violence, and that's the direction that I really hope things go in. And on that note, our next episode of Tales of the Resistance is going to be focused on the healthcare system. And Susie Terse, novice nurse, is the protagonist of it. And we're going to be having a panel discussion, another one of these, this time with the San Francisco Public Library, that I believe is, it's July 25th. And you can tune in on their website and get some guests who are thinking about how we can have health justice with our current system. And and we're very excited for that conversation. Well,
so forgive me for interrupting. It's my time. I have to get going now. But this is a fantastic conversation. For those of you that haven't tuned in, check out the show. 1 week left. You'll love it, and you'll be moved to do something.
Yeah.
Órale, si se puede. Thank you all so much. Take care.
Hugo.
Thank you so much.
And thank you all very much to to all of our panelists. And I know that we can't hear our attendees, but give us some virtual love in the chat. And again, thank you. It's been a lovely panel.
Woo!
All right.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you all so much for having me here today, and I really appreciate the work that you all have done. I think we didn't have time to talk about this as much, but I do think that art is a very important part of it, plays its own role in revolution and in doing organizing. So
Yay!
Thank you, and thank you for all your hard work too.
Yes, Alex.
It's a long slog,
Oh.
but eventually we'll win.
Yes.
Yeah, we have to.
We have to.